Dr. Abrahamowicz, for those of you who don't know, is a James McGill professor. And I looked it up because I needed to look it up to see what exactly was the distinction of a James McGill professor.
That's good.
Now we know. So it was created in the year 2000. McGill wanted to do something special in the year 2000. They created 2 awards for faculty. One was the William Dawson Award and one was the James McGill Award. And the James McGill Award recognizes a senior scholar status as an outstanding and original researcher of world-class caliber and an international leader in his field. And that's Michal Abrahamowicz. And Michal Abrahamowicz is absolutely a leader in his field. And one of the most important things that he's done is that he's co-founded and he is the co-chair of the international Stratos initiative. Does anybody know what that is? Except Mariam. Yes, it's an initiative which seeks to improve the analyses of observational studies. So much like the strobe and the MUHC and all the other different tools that we have, this one looks to improve statistical reporting, and I think it's a wonderful initiative. So Dr. Abrahamowicz has a storied CV that I will not go through, but some of the numbers are absolutely incredible, Michal. And I don't know what I would do with over 340 papers. And, and I know that you are invited all around the world to speak, 6 continents. I say that I visited 6 continents. You've been invited to speak on 6 continents. I guess we're just waiting for those Antarctica people to wake up, eh? Yeah, okay. And so Michal today is going to talk to us about his primary interest and love, which is time-varying variables, and an approach to using them in applications of pharmaco-epidemiology. So thank you, Michal, for entertaining us today with your topic.
Thank you, Teresa. It's a big pleasure to speak here, and also a big stress. I always say the most stressful presentations are in your own institution, in front of your own friends and colleagues. So I am very, very nervous today, as you see that. So I apologize and suggest those who heard me speaking about this escape. I remember of my team will probably feel loyal and not escape, but others are. I am a bit recycling some idea. I wanted to, given that COE is a relatively new regroupment of scientists, I thought it would be good to have some overview of what I am and my team is working on. So I will be speaking in detail about the new methods with application pharmaco-epi, which is the main field of application when I collaborate with many people here, primarily with Sasha and Luis, with whom we kind of have this big, decent grant. I'm keeping this, yeah, exactly. No, so there's many collaborators here. I'm just kind of selling the work of other people, including many people who are my current or ex-trainees and some collaborators both at McGill and internationally. I apologize for many omissions, but it will take too much time to list everybody here. Okay, so I will try to speak about some challenges in assessing the effect of time-varying exposures and treatment. And I will keep it at a conceptual level. I have the 25 last slides of my presentation, which I will not show, have statistical details of estimation, model selection, and so on. This, if you suffer serious insomnia, you can cure yourself by reading, but I will skip this for the moment. I will have to give you a few details about our main methodology, which we call weighted cumulative exposure, or WCE model, and then I will illustrate some application. And this is a very self-serving goal, because one of the reasons I'm giving these talks is to elicit new collaboration, new interest. So I wanted to illustrate what this method can produce in real-life studies, and hopefully every second talk I am giving about this produces some new interesting collaboration, new data set, which my trainees then can switch over. So half of the talk could be spent discussing this slide. This is a empirical micro data. These are actually true data on a single patient in Quebec, an elderly patient who was using flurazepam, commonly known as Valium, a very popular psychotropic medication. And on the horizontal axis, we have time. So I'm just using this.
Doesn't work out.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so on the horizontal axis, sorry for using fingers, not elegant. My father will be very upset with me, but is the time axis in days, so just half a year history. On the vertical axis, you have a current dose reconstructed, of course, from the RAMQ prescription database, but let's believe this is the current dose of the subject. 1 means the standard WHO recommended dose, so 2 means twice the standard dose, and so on. And this is what we call the time-varying exposure. You see that over time, both the doses and the status, whether the subject is exposed or not, changes over time. In the rare moments when the dose is 0, the subject did not have currently a prescription for this drug. And if he had, the value may change. So it's both time-varying binary and quantitative intensity of exposure change. In standard cohort studies or nested case control study, any kind of when we have a cohort and we follow over time, we will assess associations between exposure and outcome by doing some statistical analysis, and this requires assigning a single value of exposure to every subject at every point in time. So let's do this exercise. Let's focus on day 140 in the follow-up. So how I can define the exposure now? The simplest will be to say the subject is now exposed. The dose is not 0. Slightly more refined will be to say his current dose is corresponding to WHO recommended dose. Both information are relevant, but they only take a tiny chunk of the wealth of information we have here, because they all ignore the history, which may be relevant. And this, at my age, relevance of the history is a big question. So I always ask myself the question, how long I will have to pay a price for a stupid thing I've done when I was younger, much younger. Now I don't do any stupid thing. So let's say, should we take into account that at this moment, not only the subject is at dose 1, but also has been on this dose for more than 1 month in the past, which actually is longer than the recommended uninterrupted use of these drugs for standard clinical use. Should we take into account that he was sometimes at a higher dose, and so on and so on. So in other words, if we just take the current dose at 140, and let's say at day 45, the current dose is the same, but the history is very, very different, as you see. And if this history matters, then we have somehow to incorporate it. And this is the focus of my talk, how we deal with this kind of the wealth of information. So this is...
That would differ for every single drug.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is exactly what actually one of my slides said. The problem is not only the patterns will differ by subject, by drug, by time, but also the relevance of the history will differ. And I will address in actually I have up to 4 applications, and each one you will see a different pattern. Okay, so this was sync subject, but we can demonstrate in systematic. And Gillian Bartlett, one of my first ever students, has a paper, for instance, PDS 2001, when she saw systematically, when you look at the pattern of uses of benzodiazepines, this class of medication, there's huge variation over time in the duration of use, number of periods when people were using these drugs, how often they interrupted, for how long they interrupted, and so on. So it's a systematic feature of this kind of the data. Now, I believe philosophically when I started working on this, and then I found some reference claiming the same thing, which was nice, including Lancet and so on, that you should take into account dose, duration, and also timing of the treatment. By timing, I mean, was the treatment recent, or was it several months ago? Was the high dose given in the last week, or was the highest dose given 2 months ago, and so on and so on. Actually, there are different types of adverse effects, and they, WHO classification of this, distinguish between immediate effects, acute, often known mechanism, versus cumulative effects due to chronic use, when the effects accumulate over time, and also the long delayed, like teratogenic or carcinogenic effects, when actually the bad things may happen, if you think about adverse effects, long time after the drug was used, even the next generation, of course, sometimes. So timing is very important, and as Teresa pointed out, I think may depend on the drug, and actually for the same drug, you may have different importance of the timing depending on the outcome. The same drug may have different impact on the cardiovascular adverse effect versus on cancer, let's say, if I'm speaking hypothetically, of course. So one of the few more formal slides. So formally speaking, for a statistician, the problem is like this. The exposure history, let's say drug dose, but we are now extending this to, let's say, looking at the other exposure, for instance, air pollution or radiation and so on with some people here. But these I will not discuss now because this will be a future of the, maybe topic of the future talks. So we have a vector of the past doses. We at some point t during the follow-up, and our data allow us to reconstruct a dose at any time up to t. And we would like to incorporate this information in our analysis. But how to do it? Obviously, we cannot put all these individual doses as separate covariate in the model because this would create huge collinearity problem, multicollinearity, the model will collapse and so on. So the logical solution is two-step. First, we have somehow aggregate this information, and I call it etiologically correct exposure matrix. So I actually define some mathematical logical function, which may be very simple. For instance, it may be just, take only the current dose or take the mean of the all doses or whatever, which aggregate this information. This will be a time-varying thing because the history will change over time, so any of this mean dose or current dose or whatever will also change over time. And then once I define this, I just can put it in any standard regression model. So really the challenge is at this step, and this is what we will focus most. So then a good, for my statistical friends, whenever I work on the new type of data, it's interesting to look what people do actually. And then it gives you some idea, maybe, is there room for improvement? So Marie-Pierre Sylvestre, my first PhD student, student who worked on this topic, did a literature review, and as we expected, we found that in applied pharmaco-epidemiology studies, both in the good clinical journal and the top epidemiology journals, use a variety of exposure metrics. I'm speaking only of the sophisticated studies, which realize that you have to use time-dependent covariates for observational studies of that. And there was current use, current dose, any use in some time period in the past, total duration of past use, total cumulative dose, and some other variation of those. Now, this was okay. This I expected. What I was a bit surprised that I asked Marie-Pierre to look how they justify why they are using this and not the other. Said, oh, actually, that's very neat. Usually there's no justification. In few cases, they refer to another study which uses a similar method. He said, yeah, that's interesting because, and then I thought, okay, I'm a dumb statistician. These people are experts in clinical research and experts in pharmacology, so they know how these drugs work. Although I was a bit surprised that the knowledge is so kind of precise. But then some interesting thing came from Will Dixon, one of my favorite collaborators, our ex-master student who is now a director of rheumatology and pharmacology at Manchester, UK. Will was very interested in this association, we come back to this, between oral glucocorticoids and use of infections in rheumatoid arthritis. And for exactly the same association, he identified 6 studies all in the top rheumatology journals. And across these 6 studies, there was again a huge variation in the choice of the exposure metric. 2 studies use more than one exposure metric, I have to say. Actually, to some extent, the good thing was that all these studies did detect the association. It's very well known. But, the quantitative strength of the association, how they define it was very different, of course, depending on the method. Just to tell you that nobody is perfect, I later discovered that I'm co-author of one of the studies. Although it was published before I got interested in the topic. So anyway, I'm not criticizing, just saying that this shows that maybe we should look a bit more carefully at this problem. What I'm saying, philosophically, seems difficult to believe that current use and total past dose are both equally etiologically relevant for the same association, especially that this study has several years of follow-up. Or, there were like ever use. Ever use is a very crude exposure matrix, meaning somebody who used the drugs 5 years ago for 1 week will be classified together with somebody who is a current high-dose user for the last 6 months. It seems very, very unlikely that they have exactly the same risk if there's an association. So let's now look at so this is something Mariev, who is here, created for me to illustrate the implication of using different exposure metrics for the same drug, for the same data. So it's a hypothetical but plausible pattern of somebody who started using the drug in day 124 up at this dose, increased the dose, interrupted for some time, restarted. The details do not matter, just specific exposure pattern. We use this exposure pattern and then assume few of the conventional exposure metrics and see what kind of the changes in the risk over time they apply for exactly the same input data. So reality is exactly the same. It's just the mathematical or statistical concept changes. So on the left side, you have different variation on current exposure, current dose, current binary exposure, whatever. They all have kind of what I call the apartment building or housing project kind of shape, or HLM, if you know. On the right side, you have exactly the same data now analyzed using cumulative dose model. Either cumulative duration or cumulative dose restricted to the last month. You see that the pattern completely changes depending on which model we use. This means also that if we have different subjects with different pattern of use, do you have a question? Yeah.
Are we always talking about for the date the follow-up commences? Because my worry would be that if it's concurrent, your time variation in the dosing or the pattern, if it's concurrent with the outcome assessment, so they can influence one another.
Yes, it's always before the outcome. We never go after the outcome. I never use future to predict past. But it's in the cohort studies dynamic. It's all the time, when we estimate something like Cox model or nested case control based logistic regression, you move over time and you create a risk set, and every risk set, each individual enters with his exposure values and his outcome. Okay, very good. Now that's excellent. That's, I see. This is a more refined question. This requires marginal structural models. You have this intermediate kind of the things, and as we discuss later, we extended the methodology to, and I will show you the example of marginal structural model. So we can use it in this context if you have this kind of the data. As you know, for the moment, relatively very few pharmaco-epidemiology studies, except some studies in HIV, which are based on the clinical cohort. Very few use marginal structural model because, unfortunately, in administrative database, we often lack information on the potential kind of mediator, but it's a very valid question. The same methodology will work here. So we have both the statistical paper and the application papers, which I mentioned later. Okay? Good. So this is just to illustrate. Very, very briefly, we ran a simulation study to demonstrate that it is not a trivial concern, for instance, for power. You want to detect an association. If the true association is that the risk depends on the total cumulative dose in the past. In our simulation, we had basically perfect 100% power with 200 event and strong association. If exactly the same data were reanalyzed, assuming the exposure model is current use or current dose, the power drops to 40 or even 15%. So just to illustrate that this is a non-trivial practical consideration. And the opposite, if the true model was current dose and we use cumulative effect, then again the power would be very, very low.
Michal, my question relates to the validity of the cumulative dose. Because sometimes it's not, I understand statistically you can accumulate your doses, but biologically, a cumulative dose may not have the same importance.
Okay, because of the timing or before of something else?
I'm just wondering, and I think, again, for each drug, I think it's
that's why I think qualitative information or absolute knowledge on the pharmacokinetics or the pharmacological properties is important to know whether. I understand you can make these.
This is only the very introduction to illustrate. I mean, our models probably takes into account at least some of the concern you are raising. If you just see what's going. This is only to show how important it is to have a reasonably correct model. That if you have an incorrect model, you may have wrong inference and miss the association, whatever. The way we deal with cumulative effect is more kind of course, if you have a strong clinical knowledge, you can incorporate this. If we don't have, we let the data tell us how the cumulative effects accumulate over time. And you see example in 2 minutes. Okay?
I see a real risk there for letting statistics drive the.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's a risk here. Yes, my role is to translate what the data tell us into the best statistical evidence. Then I need substantive experts, and in each of the applications we have a bunch of substantive. Sometimes we have really fierce battles with the reviewers about our interpretation. They suggest, yeah. So that's of course but still I think it's good to reflect what the data tell us, and then we see. But you see hopefully 1 or 2 examples. So very, very briefly, we also demonstrate that if you fit several models to the same data and use standard goodness of fit statistics like Akaike information criteria, it's very, very likely that it will help you identify which models are more or less correct. You should not, however, take it very, very kind of the orthodox way. But big difference in AIC, let's say more than 4 points, and especially more than 10 points, are very, very conclusive. Again, you have to read the statistical paper we produced. But we will rely on this. Usually with more than 90% probability, the correct model, even if you run a wide variety of models, like 10 or 12 models, the correct model will be either best AIC or will be within 4 points of the best AIC, implying that if you have 2 models and one has AIC 6 or 10 points lower than another, then this model is for sure closer to reality and more. We never know what is the true model, of course, than the model which has much worse AIC. This is very important that I use it in our application. Okay, so now very quickly. So what we suggest in general is a good strategy. If you don't know what is the correct model, try several models and compare their goodness of fit. But this is still risky because the number of potential models is very, very large, and they are a bit arbitrary anyway. Should I look at any use in the past 6 months or past 3 months or past 9 months? So we try to develop something more general. And only here I am kind of coming to the main. And we think in general we should take into account cumulative effects, meaning we should assume that most exposures, whether pharmaco-epi or epi or environmental, whatever, is not only the exposure today or yesterday which matters for the risk of having an event today, but there will be some history. Sometimes the history may be very, very short, last few days. Sometimes may be very long. Sometimes may be a delayed effect. If I start smoking today, I never smoked in my life, I will not have lung cancer, increase the risk of lung cancer next year. I will start paying the price 3, 5, 7 years down the road. Yes. So this is specific to the both exposure and the outcome, and therefore it's very, very difficult to have a general model, except if this model is flexible enough that the estimates can adjust themselves to what is required by the data. So in general, this consideration led to the idea of what we call weighted cumulative exposure. So this is a crucial concept. If you want to remember one thing, I ask you to try to remember this. So we assume that in general, there may be a cumulative effect of exposure history, always history. We never use future to predict past. And that this can be summarized as a weighted sum of all past doses, or all doses in the relevant time interval, as you see, I will explain a bit more. Now, weighted is an essential, unweighted cumulative dose will be like summing all doses from beginning of follow-up to now. This has a very, very problematic assumption that, as I mentioned, doses taken 3 years ago are equally important as those taken 2 weeks ago. rarely this will be the case, although it could be. And actually, the special case of our model. Now, please don't mix up these weights with the IPTW weights used in marginal structure models. Actually, when we move to marginal structure model, we have two types of weights, but these are very different weights, and I will show you how it works. So more formally, the WC at time u during the follow-up will be defined formally as the sum of the products. When we sum up the dose at time t at some time in the past, not exceeding the current time, times the numerical value of the weight. And this weight depends on the time elapsed since the exposure happened. So a dose taken 2 days ago may have a different weight than the dose taken 3 weeks ago, and so on. And some doses may be actually zero. You see how we get about this dose, how we get these weights. So this is the main concept. So just to give you an example, somebody started taking a drug at day 23 in follow-up, and we wanted to evaluate his cumulative exposure at day 30. These are the doses, and let's assume the weight function gives us the highest weight to the dose taken today, and gradually decreases as we move back in time. So we just multiply the dose by the weight and sum up this product and get the weighted cumulative exposure. You see later how we translate it into clinically meaningful hazard ratios or observations. So graphically, how it looks like. Assume my weight function looks like this. This is actually the first paper I produced on this topic in 2006. So let's assume the weight is such that current dose has a weight of 1. A dose taken a month ago has a half of this dose, and after about 3 months, the dose goes completely to 0. We apply this weight function and our WC metric to the input data I showed you before. The resulting WC, our exposure metric, now becomes a continuous, relatively smooth function of follow-up time. Of course, starting at the moment when people started to be exposed, reaching the top here, then going slightly down when the exposure is interrupted, but not immediately to 0, and then rebounding again when they started taking the dose at the higher level and so on. So for each subject and every point in time, we have this kind of the construct created. But of course, for the moment, I assume I know the weight function. But please give me a favor and try to remember generally this bimodal shape. I need it for very important proof. Some of you know that. I apologize for recycling some joke. So this was, you remember, this was the apartment blocks we received with the current use. And now I will contrast this with our WC statistic using real-life data. You may, oh, sorry. No. This beach is related to a very famous Beatles song. Ipanema, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so this is real. This is Pico dos Hermanos, the peak of two brothers. And you see the bimodal shape very resembling our, and this is the product of natural processes of volcanic activity, erosion, and so on. While these are human ugly approximation to reality, which resemble what you get from current dose. So no doubt our model is more natural and better reflects reality. This actually I was going to International Biometric Conference in Florianópolis, south of Brazil, in 2010, and I went on the rooftop of the hotel, and I was working on the slide, and I look at it and say, no, I recognize this slide, so it has become the most used slide in my life. I should say. But we had the honorary citizenship of the year for promoting that. Okay. Okay, so now, how we estimate the weight function? In reality, if you speak with experts and they will tell you, yes, it's probably the effect will probably last 3 months or maybe, and probably the most recent doses will be most important. But of course, they will not give you the numerical value of the weight function. I consulted with Dr. Radan Čapek, now retired ex-chair of pharmacology at McGill, who actually worked with benzodiazepines. And Radan told me, yes, we know a lot from pharmacodynamics and kinetics, but when you, in the real life, when these drugs are taken by old people, the elimination is not the same and whatever. So we cannot give you a precise value. So we estimate it from the data, assuming the data are more or less okay. That's like the statistician approach. We use a flexible regression spline technique. I don't have time to go, but basically with exactly the same model, we can get any weight function, and this will be some function, a smooth function, may look like this, may look like this. This is estimated using usually 3 to 5 coefficients which are estimated from the data. Like you would estimate, for instance, for linear and quadratic effect of a continuous exposure. The same philosophy, but slightly more computation. So once we do this, sorry, Nandi. Nandi.
Imagine most of these data sets cover long periods of time.
Yes.
So what is telling us about using 3 knots? Is it something that is applied across the period of time?
Okay, that's very good. Actually, next slide will address your. Yeah, there's one thing which is the procedure is almost fully automatic, except one parameter which we will just cover in the next slide. So just that once we do the calculation, our WC becomes a standard time-dependent continuous quantitative covariate, which can be put in Cox model or any other model which has time-dependent covariates. And we can reconstruct then the result, and everything is done automatically by our program. The main version of the program is on the 3-axis CRAN site. Now it's being updated. Marie-Ève and Marie-Pierre take care of this, but if you are interested, you can contact us or whatever. So it's actually, and it's now used in few countries, on few continents now, including, of course, the biggest number of applications comes from PhD, unfortunately. There's one parameter we need to get from the user. I think this was Nandini's question. We may have 20 years of follow-up, and it will be often unreasonable to assume that the exposure has effect over 20 years. But how short or how long it should be. So we ask the user, who understands the data more or less, what is the longest period over which they think the exposure may have the effect. It does not have to be at all precise. We run a lot of sensitivity analysis with simulated data and so on. What is important is not to underestimate this. So if you are not sure whether it's 1 year or 2 years, opt for 2 years. If you overshoot this period, you lose a bit of efficiency. It will be like adding unnecessary cubic polynomial to a continuous, but there will be no systematic bias. If you underestimate this, you have bias estimate, and you may use some diagnostic I don't have time to cover, which will help you detecting that there's a problem. It's basically a constraint versus unconstrained model. In serious application, we always run some sensitivity analysis, extending and shortening the window and seeing. And we can use AIC to decide what is the best model. Usually this was reasonably conclusive, and it's well covered by simulation. So we can use some small sensitivity analysis. We also sometimes run sensitivity analysis with respect whether we need 3 nodes or 2 nodes or 1 node. And most often we find that 1 node is enough. With cubic spline are very flexible already, but sometimes when the relation is very complex and the large data set, we may use 2 or 3 nodes. So these are technical details more to discuss with. So I have to be sure that I have at least some time to cover application. Okay, just very briefly, we extended it to marginal structural models, to pharmacosurveillance, and recently to competing risk with different domain training. This will be actually covered in the application. I skip. You can believe me that I run a lot of simulation, and my team is actually run a lot of simulation. Each of our statistical papers includes massive simulation results when we validate this method and show how they work. And usually we believe now with a reasonably strong association, if you have 250 events more or less, this method makes sense. I've never used it in the small data set with less than 100 events because it's a complex modeling. And you can get estimate, but the precision will be a problem. So let's look at 3 applications. The first one, and the classic, is with Will Dixon, whom I mentioned, and Marie-Ève. Here, we are actually recycling what Will had in his thesis. He was interested in well-known association between oral glucocorticoids and infection in rheumatoid arthritis. He used LAMQ data. It was a nested case control design, so the Marieva extended the method to nested case control design, and we had 1,800 cases of serious infection. Only those infections when the infection was the primary reason for hospitalization were taken as outcome to avoid some biases. And we adjusted for whatever we could in RAM2. There was, of course, standard discussion and fighting with the reviewers whether these adjustments are enough or not. Sasha is also, actually data came also from Sasha, so she's also a recorder. So very briefly, we ran a series of models, including all models which were using the literature on this association, and few additional models we propose as potentially plausible. We compared the AIC of these models, and we had a large data set, so it was model discrimination was very good. Our model has outperformed any other model by these 27 points, which according to simulations were conclusive evidence that is a better model. The closest was the average dose in the last 90 days. It was 28 points above our model. So there seems that this idea weighted cumulative exposure was useful here. This is the weight function, now shown the way that this is current. This is the dose taken today, and as everybody expected, the current dose has the highest impact. However, and the impact of the doses goes rather quickly down in the last 3 months, but there's a cumulative effect of what we took in the last 3 months. But in addition, it may not look that dramatic, but actually, statistically speaking, with this database, there's a very significant long-term effect. If we run the model restricting the exposure to 1 year, the likelihood ratio test for the worsening of the fit was significant at 6 decimal places, and the deviance dropped by more like 25 points or something. So data absolutely insisted that there's a long-term effect we call the second bound. We had 5 reviewers for the top rheumatology journal, Arthritis and Rheumatic RD, how it is called, I always forget, but it's top. Yeah. And one of the 5 reviewers really wanted to kill the paper. He absolutely did not want to agree. I assume it was he, but very nasty. To agree with the second bump. But one of our co-authors, David Ray, worked on these drugs, and he came up with a complex explanation that there may be a dual effect, short-term effect on innate immune system and long-term effect on adaptive system. And this was, there were reference to the basic science. So I always, whenever we discover something unexpected, I would like to have this a posteriori explanation about it. If not, I say probably the statistic misbehave and we put it into the drawer. So this weight function I show you was published in RLD, but as you can imagine, most clinicians were not very happy with it. So we had to do something more. We actually have an extra program which calculates the odds ratio or hazard ratio, here it was nested case control series, the odds ratio, for every exposure pattern you want relative to any other exposure pattern, together with bootstrap-based confidence interval. And this gives clinicians an idea what we can speak about. Remember, I started saying I don't believe that it's reasonable to put together short-term user from long time ago, long-term user from recency and so on. You can see in the standard current use model for the same data, the odds ratio for current use versus non-use was 1.7. With the narrow confidence interval because of the large data set. Now, please notice how it varies depending on the pattern of use, always relative to non-user. Current use at the low dose for only a few days has a ridiculously small risk increase. Nobody will care about this. If they stay on the same small dose for 1 month or 3 months, it starts to be of some clinical relevance. If, however, they are on the high dose for the even short period, and especially for, let's say, 1 month, we are speaking about doubling of the risk, and so on. So basically, Dixon is now programming experimentally a small, he's also a fanatic of electronic medicine, so he is programming these models for experimental using clinical practice. The physician can plug in any pattern and predict what will be the impact. And now we are actually extending this to estimating absolute risk, so probabilities of event. Yeah. So this is based on weighted expo. Yeah. Yes. And so whatever, and for any other application, we can do this. So very, very briefly, I will just, yes. Yeah. No. This was specifically for oral glucose. So all oral glucocorticoids are typically put together, and the dose is converted, I think, to prednisone equivalent dose. So we did not, we follow the advice of our rheumatology expert, and they believe it's, but for another class of drug, it may be completely different. And actually, we have some negative application. We have situations, for instance, with Michel Abrahamowicz, student, non-clinical supervised, when we use our model, it did not show anything on the top of the standard model, which is okay. This we know. There was no interesting cumulative effect, and you can speculate what the reason. Of course, but now I can say for the 10 serious application, 7 definitely confirmed the usefulness of this, and 3 others were kind of not exciting, which is typically what happened. So I'm selecting, of course, those which are more interesting. So now we look at the flurazepam volume and 4 related injuries, another well-known association, much smaller data set. So, oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry, for some reason okay. Okay, yeah, okay. So it's still flurazepam. So thank you, Michael. I always exactly. So here we know that the association is probably very acute because of the very short-term, short elimination time and whatever. So we generally assume it may last up to 30 days. And we had a small cohort we used on the new users in flurazepam. This was data provided by Robin Tamlin, only 250 events. Here we use time to event analysis, extended COPS model. And we again fit a range of models. Many models did not pick up the association because of the power and maybe not adequate adjustment. Our model and the model which assumed there may be a withdrawal effect, which is too complex now to explain, but you see a few minutes what I mean. And the cumulative dose from the last month were the 3 which pick up a significant association. But still our model fit better, but not dramatically better than the withdrawal model. Much better than any other model. And here we expected a very short effect, and it was very well known. And these are our weight functions, so it should be a line of 0 here. Positive weight means risk increase. So what this tells us, and these are some sensitivity analyses with respect to number of nurses. All models agree that there's a short-term increase associated with high dose taken 3 to 10 days ago or 3 to 7 days ago. This was expected and we felt well. You see, we use 30 days, but actually all models tell us there's almost no effect. If we take confidence, there will be completely no effect beyond 10 days ago, which was good. So in spite of this, we overshooting this window, we got shorter. What was very troubling at the beginning was the very significantly negative weights associated with exposure today or a day ago, 2 days ago. This was not expected at the first moment. Negative weight would mean protective effect. And then we kind of came with interesting explanation. Because you never can have a negative dose, what happens, we multiply different doses at different point in time by the weights. So if somebody stopped taking the drug 3 days ago, they have positive weights here multiplied by the doses and 0 here. If they continue taking the dose, this positive effect of the recent exposure will be somehow outweighed or somehow reduced by the negative effect of the most recent, which implies that the highest risk according to this model, will be a person who was a high user at high dose of this drug up to about 2 days ago and very, very recently stopped. And this is consistent with the withdrawal effect. And this Dr. Čapek was kind of was quite happy with this because he believed there may be habituation withdrawal effect. Whether it's true or not, we know. The fact that the withdrawal model, which I specifically designed to capture this, was the second best model, would also be, but we did not follow this, and this probably it just. Yeah, yes, of course. It's we are assuming that they take the drug as prescribed. Yeah. Yes. If there's any other explanation of this, but we brainstormed, we did not come with any very clear other explanation of why. Maybe. But please remember the outcome is for related injury.
Right. So then if you're saying also on one of the drugs, and somebody thinks, oh, they're getting sick, you better not give them. I'm just saying this is another.
Yeah, of course. That's absolutely.
I think the difficulty is knowing exactly that somebody has stopped their drugs 2 days ago when you're giving them
that a bit, was also inducing some anxiety for me. This is why we put this in statistical paper, not in clinical paper, because I think the precising of some kind of reversal causality bias will be the hospitalization due to related injuries delayed relative to the date or whatever. This kind of some messiness in the data may be explaining this. But this is why, I ran this to Radan, and he said he believes actually quite possible that there will be a true withdrawal effect. It may be a mixture of the two. Sasha, as you probably know, the next step, if it is really serious, we try to replicate in another data set. So in another work with Dixon, we ran the same analysis in UK and US, and we more or less got the same weight function for the glucocorticoids and diabetes, for instance. Not always we have, it is not my main concern to think about this. But, if we think it's a very, very important thing, I find it definitely we have to replicate it in the data. And we should consider another explanation. I agree. Okay, Sasha, any systematic feature of this estimate would be of worry for me if we systematically find the same. We find different pattern in each of the applications, even if all of them are using administrative data. So for sure, it's just not the common artifact which we discover. Whether there can be some complex alternative explanation, absolutely. Like for anything we find, 97% of epidemiological association can be explained by something else if you think enough. So, of course, fewer, I think, I am just generating interesting hypotheses. This is not the final word, and of course, I will not tell anybody to stop withdrawing this medication or whatever. But maybe I would say, maybe be careful about cutting somebody in a high dose to kind of abruptly, we don't know.
Actually, I love it when you can find something like this and then think of different possibilities. You'll never know the truth.
Yeah.
The better we get at attributing possibilities.
Yeah. I don't enjoy, there's no one thing in collaborative research I enjoy more than finding alternative explication. This is what I call the detective work. So whenever, so we usually brainstorm, and, but I am, of course, limited. My knowledge is almost zero. Sometimes I have some intuition and ask stupid question, could it be this, and sometimes we discover something. Actually, from our recent collaboration, that sometimes you look at the results, or maybe actually we should try this model, and then we see that actually this model explains things better. Yeah, yes. So I am just kind of illustrating. So I probably, I think I will skip. I just wanted to tell you that we may have another interesting thing, for instance, in another application using marginal structural models to assess the cardiovascular effects of one of the drugs used in HIV. We help explaining why there were completely contradictory findings in the literature. Some people reported no effect, some reported a risk increase, and some reported risk decrease. Here, this is actually the JASA paper with Erika Moody and using Swiss cohort data. We found that the weight function had two very distinct periods. There was a risk increase associated with the recent use of the drug in the last year, and the risk decrease associated with long-term use. And we have, again, we had 2 clinical experts, and we had an interesting potential application for this, that there's a short adjustment of the body to wear power for agent produces this increase if they survive the critical period. Then we have two phenomena. Depletion of susceptible, the most people most susceptible to cardiovascular risk, we have the event early on, so they will not be long-term user of the drug in our data set. And also the potential benefits of the fact that this drug controls the primary disease, and therefore people are generally more healthy and so on. And then we can actually translate our result into this. This is very interesting. Hernan and the company, they often speak about cumulative effect, but they treat them without weighting the past. What we show here, that if you assume people are continuously treated with this drug, their risk of cardiovascular events relative to non-users with the same characteristics, adjusting. This is Swiss HIV cohort, so we have massive adjustment for time-dependent mediators, everything we could. The risk goes up to about more than 2 maybe after 1 year of continuous use, and then gradually goes down. So after about 2 years, long-term users are the same level of non-user. So one bad decision would be if somebody already survived more than a year on this drug to interrupt them, because now they may have benefited rather than the increased risk. And finally, we extended it to competing risk. All this was, for the moment, adverse effects. We can also use this in effectiveness. With Coraline Danieli, we have my postdoc, we have the paper based on what we do in DSEN, but we got the data from Cristiano and Luis and Sasha, and we now promoting use of competing risk rather than composite events. So in many cardiovascular studies, like the previous study I just discussed, we use a combined stroke, coronary events, and whatever. Here we have a large market scan data set when we can separate the effect of the same exposure. Here, thiazide diuretics, which are popular antihypertensive medication, on stroke versus coronary events. We had several hundred of events of each type, and we found that there's no effect. It's basically overfit bias, but completely no significant effect for coronary event, but it's a short-term protective effect of recent use against stroke. And now this can lead to further estimates. For instance, what will be the impact of interrupting because these people actually are hypertensive people who should stay on this medication. What happens when they interrupt the medication? You could say, for instance, a dose-dependent risk increase, which may go up to 1.5 point estimate hazard ratio for people who interrupted this drug recently, and then it stabilized more or less at the same level. So it's like there are a few other applications, of course, thanks God I don't have time to cover. And just in general, I just wanted to mention that we are running now additional extension of this. All up to now was pharmaco-epidemiology application. We are now applying this to continuous risk factors or prognostic factors measured in general epidemiology. And our standard application includes Framingham heart study data. And we just sent first paper to Statistics Medicine, including application, when we show the effects of systolic blood pressure, how the effect of past history of systolic blood pressure accumulate. So the risk does not depend on what we had now, but on the values of systolic blood pressure from the last 8 to 10 years in a non-trivial way. And we are also extending it to the situation when the outcome is quantitative and not time to event. And we have very interesting results for the impact, again, of oral glucocorticoid now on the weight gain, which seems to be an interesting topic among users of this drug. Thank you very much. So if you are interested, I will be more than happy. There are several further extensions, so I don't have to worry about my trainees. I don't have even to worry about the first generation of trainees of my trainees if they want to continue. There's enough problem, and this is actually incorporated in the general Stratos when we work with the expert on exposure measurement and on missing data and so on. So, thank you very much.
Yes.
So I think you may have already answered this at the very end. A lot of what you were saying up till near the end seem to be predicated on a pharmacological model in which both a dose-related effect and time-related effect. So longer duration, higher the dose, the higher the risk. But there are some kinds of adverse effects that are like allergic reactions, which are immediate, or idiosyncratic reactions that if they haven't occurred by pancreatitis or bone marrow, if they haven't occurred by 6 weeks or something like that, or 2 months, they're never done. So I guess that is that with your model, using your model, would you see that rise and then fall as
yes, if you think
a very demanding allergic one, you see a very quick peak and then a fall.
it will take too much. We can combine this with some. We are thinking now about adding some additional element to the model. For instance, in some studies, they may be on the top of the cumulative effect. They may be a separate effect of recent change in dose, for instance, like or something else. So we can add this. In your case, I think the model will more or less allow us to discover this if we have enough data. That you said that the reaction may be only in the few first weeks after you start using the medication. So actually, with Yushu Wang, my PhD student, now we have this extended model which uses 2 time axes. One will be the follow-up time axis, and second time axis since the exposure started. And then we can show that the 2 may have different effects. So of course, in every application, we try to have the discussion and think whether this model makes sense. And I will not say makes sense in all situations. My hope is that it makes sense in a reasonable number of situations to justify. But of course, and as Sasha, for instance, suggested before, we have always to be very, very careful about artifact and alternative explanation and so on. Thank you.
And then the other thing is the actually that helps with phenomena. This is specifically an indication for treatment that indicates
Thank you. The second question is more complex, and I would have to think about this. It relates to confounding by indication, which we have now tried to combine this method with. Yes. Yes, the change in drug class is always, in any study, I think that the change in the drug in observational study is an informative event. So and this is another extension we may consider. It's actually possible. But once we have this, we can combine this with any other kind of statistical tools, as I illustrated. So we can extend the model to have, for instance, a covariate indicating change in the data, and we actually have the model not published yet, when we estimate this weighted cumulative effect for up to maybe 2 or 3 drugs simultaneously. What we are doing with the Rodina, it was, for sure we have 2. Okay, so we have, I'm speaking about the study with the, we can, if people are on more than 1 drug and we can extend this, and we have enough data model effect of 2 or 3 different drugs, and take into account additional that whether this was the first line or whether they changed the medication. Because I think this itself will be often associated with the risk. So the effect in the new users of drug A may be different than in users of drug A who were previous users of drug B. There will be usually the higher risk for whatever reason. So this is just one of the many, many additional complications we have to think.
Thank you, Michal. Are you here for a few more minutes? Because we have some beautiful food outside. And
yes, I actually already grabbed some, yes, but I will be very happy to. Yeah, of course.